Okay, so wonderful to be here and wonderful to be speaking with all of you today. Uh, my topic, which has been given to me by Teach for India, is blended learning for teacher education. Now, education is a sector where one finds a lot of passionate people, and I will count myself among them. Now, one of the downsides of this passion is that many of us sometimes tend to have extreme views on various things. And the same is true with respect to this topic of the use of technology for teacher education. So, the one extreme view is that teaching is a practice oriented profession. You need to learn how a real class works, you need to practice it in a real class, etc., etc. So it is not really possible to learn all of this online or using technology. There is no replacement to the physical and live manner of educating teachers. So that is one extreme view. And of course, COVID has forced everyone with this kind of a view to rethink and explore what the possibilities are, what the possibilities can be. And then, of course, the other extreme view tends to jump in, saying technology can take care of everything. You can learn online, you can take adaptive tests, you can even simulate a real class, etc., etc. And of course, like many other things in life, the reality lies somewhere in between, which is why I like the title of this session, Blended Learning for Teacher Education. Blended is often confused with online or technology based, but blended means exactly what the word connotes, which is some use of technology and some use of the physical world, and more importantly, the two of them blended to deliver whatever outcomes we are looking for. So very glad to be speaking on this topic today. And there is another reason, by the way, why I was thrilled to be invited for this particular topic on this particular day, because today evening at 6:30 p.m., we at Center are launching a blended learning based teacher education program in partnership with Manipal University. So the first batch of 100 participants is starting today evening at 6:30 p.m. And it felt like a lot of coincidence to me to be invited to speak on this topic exactly today. Over the last 12 months, in the course of designing this program and trying to make it truly world class, we have learned a lot about blended learning for teacher education. So I'm going to try and share some of those learnings here today. And I'm going to try and use the Manipal Center program as a case example of to explain how we made some of the practical choices that you end up facing on this topic. So before I proceed, if it is okay, Mansi, I will share my screen and use a couple of slides as we go along. So talking about, before getting into where technology can be used and cannot be used, the first question is, what are some of the components of high quality teacher education? And of course, there are books and books and research papers written on this topic. I have tried to distill it down to 5 components over here. One is background theory or research. That is, the program itself needs to be grounded in research, but also the participants who are going through the program need to understand some of the background theory or research behind teaching and behind the various competencies of teaching. Because while teaching is a practice oriented profession, if we want teachers to be reflective practitioners who are also constantly improving their own practice, it is important for them to understand the research behind that practice and why something came about. The second important component is, of course, the strong grounding in some of the key competencies for being a great teacher, and learning each of these competencies during the course of this teacher education program. The third important competency, which a lot of research and particularly recent research has shown, is peer learning. So teaching being a profession where teachers often don't get to work closely with other adults in the natural course of their day-to-day work, it is very important for teacher education to have a very strong peer learning component, which can be carried forward as you go through your career as a teacher. The fourth important component is practical internship. And in fact, some of the changes in the B.Ed program that NCT and others have envisaged in recent years talk a lot about the importance of this component, and the importance of getting apprenticeship while going through your teacher education. And finally, career outcomes. Now, this is a component which is often ignored in both pre-service and in-service teacher education. And in fact, one of the reasons why CENTA as an organization even exists is because we wanted to bridge this gap, which is to connect outstanding teachers to great careers based on their competencies, and to make sure that teacher education is linked to career outcomes, which therefore will then drive demand from teachers themselves for high quality teacher education. So these are the 5 components which I would stress on as being the most important components of high quality teacher education, which then brings us to the next question, which is what is the right blend between technology and the physical world for each of these components. And here I'm going to try and share some of the learnings that we've had, as well as some of the choices that we are making practically on this balance. So coming to the first component, which is the background theory or research, this is where technology can actually play the most powerful role, because as you can imagine, a lot of this can be driven through self-learning with facilitators addressing queries rather than necessarily taking the class through the entire theory itself. There are, of course, important theoretical elements which faculty members should ideally go through during their live online sessions. But again, it is something that can be done in a live online session kind of manner rather than on the ground. And again, in the Manipal Center program, the choice we have made is that the big concepts will be covered in the live online sessions. Many of the additional concepts will be through self-learning, with the live sessions being more for answering queries, doing practice, and so on. So this is a component where technology can actually play the strongest role. The second one, strong grounding on key competencies. I'm going to come back to this later because it's not one thing. There are many competencies and technology plays out differently for each. So I'll just come back to this one. The third one on peer learning. Now, this is something where technology actually can play a very interesting role in enabling peer learning. On one hand, of course, there is no substitute for being in touch with other learners, and in this case, teacher students on the ground. But on the other hand, what the power of technology is that you can actually be in touch with learners from many different backgrounds. So for example, this batch of 100 starting today evening comes from 20 different states of India, comes with experience ranging from almost none to many, many years, comes from many different socioeconomic backgrounds. So technology can actually enable you to be in touch with peers of diverse backgrounds, which of course has a strong learning element to it, as long as you are also able to get some of the practical inputs on the ground from other peers, which brings me to the practical internship component. Now, this is the part which should ideally be based entirely in the physical world. And of course, again, when we say entirely in the physical world, it's a strange thing today because schools themselves are online. So whether an internship will happen in the school's physical campus or in the school's online environment is again something that will keep changing dynamically now in the next several months. But irrespective of that, the internship needs to be based in the physical world. And again, in this program, the Manipal Center program, we have tied up and in the process of tying up with many more schools and other organizations based on the candidates' career interest in terms of what kinds of entities they would like to do their internship in. And then again, the internship is designed in a manner that there is no cost to the employer, and therefore a wide number of employers are willing to provide candidates with the experience that is necessary for making a blended learning program practical. And which then brings me to the last part, which is career outcomes. Here again, technology can play a very interesting enabling role. So, for example, the way we have made that practical choice is that somewhere in the month of Feb for the first batch, and then there is a second batch starting in December. So, in the month of May for the second batch, we will be having an online placement fair to begin with, so that candidates can get exposure to employers from literally anywhere in the world at the first stage. But then depending on how that goes between the candidate and the employer, one can then decide if travel is needed, physical meetings are needed, etc., for taking that forward. So this is how I would see the blend of technology and the physical world for each of these 5 components. And this is how we have made some of the practical choices. I'll come to the second component, as I said, which is the strong grounding in key competencies. Now, when we think about what are the key competencies for a teacher, again, there are 2 schools of thought on this. There is a school of thought that teaching is sort of an integrated act, and it is difficult to almost break it into certain competencies, which is partly true, and would agree with that. At the same time, when you think about how teachers need to be trained, how they need to be certified, etc., practically it becomes important to define what those competencies are, so that I, as a teacher and as a professional, can get a sort of a framework on what are the things that I need to be good at, what are the things that I'm already good at, what are the things I need to improve on. And which is where, as CENTA, we have been operating with a framework that we call CENTA Standards. And some of you on the call may be familiar with it. It's sort of widely used in many parts of the country. And though the screen may not be very visible, you will see that there are broad groups of competencies: technical competencies, professional competencies, and core competencies. And what we have done practically for this program, and which is what my view would be on blended learning, is to take competency by competency and see which are the ones which can be sufficiently covered in a technology-enabled manner versus which are the ones which need practical, real-world grounding for you to learn fully. So I'll take an example over here. If you take something like content development and planning, which, as you will see, is one of the competencies within technical competencies. Here, there is one aspect. Now, each competency is broken into aspects. So you will see CD.1, which is learning objectives. Now, this is a component which can actually be covered very well by technology, because you can get understanding and practice with many different kinds of learning objectives, even in an online environment. Whereas when you move further on what are some of the pedagogical methods, and then how do you bring them together as an integrated plan for instruction, this is where the real world linkage becomes much more important, and therefore the course starts linking with the practical exercises that one will go through in one's internship. So again, when you go back to where technology may or may not play a strong role, you will find that there are certain competencies where it can play a strong role. There are others where the physical world needs to come in strongly, and a high quality teacher education program needs to blend these two at the daily and weekly level. And that is the last thing I want to say before I stop, which is that, and I realize that we are almost running out of time, that that on a daily and weekly basis, it becomes important to blend where technology will be playing a role and where the physical world will come in. So let me actually stop with that since we are running out of time. And sorry, Mansi, I think you asked two audience questions. I don't know if there is time to answer that.
Yeah, both the questions are about how do we bridge the gap between teachers who have adapted to technology and teachers who are still struggling. Especially teachers who are in the 45 age range. That's the question. If you would like to address them.
Sure. So let me take the second question very quickly, which is, yes, older teachers do find it challenging to adapt to technology. Having said that, I think that is something that, when there is a necessity, everyone learns and everyone needs to learn. I think it's about providing the right guidance to these teachers on how technology is not just about teaching in the online mode, and how one needs to use a blend of synchronous and asynchronous, as it's called technically, even in their own teaching, as we've been talking about for teacher education. But let me come back to the first question, which I think is in my mind, the much bigger question, which is how do we bridge the gap between the teachers who have access to resources and the teachers who do not have access to resources. Now, that's a very good question. And I do think that blended teacher education programs need to be designed in line with the kind of resources teachers may have. And incidentally, we are actually also launching one more blended teacher education program, especially for teachers from an affordable private school background. And this program is very specific. This we are doing in partnership with a UK-based university. And this program is designed quite differently, recognizing that many of these teachers may not have devices, may not have continuous internet access, etc. And therefore, the program itself is designed as small, bite-sized chunks where you might be going through 10 to 15 minute modules, or micro modules would be the right word, and doing a series of offline exercises yourself without needing access to the device or the internet at that time. So the program in that sense is designed differently. Now, which also then brings us to the next question on how do you blend these two? So how do you actually have a class which is sufficiently diverse in terms of people with good technology access and those without? And do you design it for the ones without technology access? And I don't think we have an answer to that question yet. I think as we run both these programs over the next 6 months, we will probably learn quite a lot about these two categories, and might know more about how that blending could happen.